come in hug and all that stuff. So. Our next speaker is Steve Gunther. Does anybody know Steve?
Yeah.
Steve has been a member of the Franklin Club for over 6 years. He is currently serving our club as webmaster, and the web looks great. He always keeps it updated. A role he's filled for most of that time. He's doing his speech entry in he did it in the last year's International Speech Contest. Did you ever think of yourself as a hero? This is a question we will examine in today's speech. Please help me warmly welcome Steve as he considers that question. Are you a hero?
Good morning, fellow Toastmasters. Most welcome guests. I do share something with our previous speakers. I, too, have 2 children. But there's one difference. I don't live at home anymore. Oh, that's wonderful. But during the years that they were growing up, believe me, there were times when heroic actions were called for. And since we're raising the topic of heroic actions, I'd like to ask all of you a question to have you consider for yourselves. Are you a hero? Are you now? Have you ever been a hero? Before we try to answer that question, let's look at our definition of what a hero is. And let's use the classical Greek method by describing a hero. All right? Picture, if you will, a small English town, 1985-ish. Local McDonald's. Yes, they had McDonald's in England back in 85. You know. People are sitting down to lunch. And through the door comes a gang of local toughs. You can tell they're toughs just by their demeanor. And they're clearly looking for trouble. And they walk over to one table and they pick on some poor fellow sitting there and they begin to start trouble. It escalates, and obviously, there's going to be a fight. The leader, a really nasty character, picks up the people up sitting over on the side, this young fellow they were after. He was sitting in a booth, but in the middle they had tables and chairs, loose chairs. The leader picks up a chair, and these were fairly hefty chairs. And he's getting ready to hit this poor chap over the head with the chair. By this time, the crowd had gathered around. Everyone was watching. Everyone was watching. No one said or did anything. They just watched. Until this young Air Force NCO, non-commissioned officer, local Air Force base, stepped up behind the leader, grabbed him around the chest, and said something very profound. Hey, put the chair down, you're going to hurt the guy. Oh, isn't that what he was trying to do? However, he did it. And the tough put the chair down, turned around in amazement. And I knew at that moment he was going to rip my head off and hand it to me. Because yes, that young Air Force NCO was me. He just looked at me. He didn't know what to say or do. But then someone over on the other side of the room laughed, and someone over there laughed, and people started laughing. The mood was broken. And the gang of toughs, they just left. I sat down. My wife, who was sitting there with our 2 children, proceeded to tell me all sorts of things, like what an idiot I was because I could have gotten myself killed. I'm sitting there shaking, wondering what in the world did I do? Why did I do it? What came over me? And eventually I calmed down. So that was kind of a heroic action. I hadn't really thought about that for 25 years until I saw a video on the internet. The occasion was a 2008 TED conference. TED stands for Technology, Education, Design. They have a website, TED.com. It's a wonderful place to have these discussions, these talks, these little speeches. But this man, Philip Zimbardo, was giving a talk on how people become monsters. But during the talk, or rather more towards the end, he talked about how people become heroes. And one case in point that he had was a scene in New York City on the subway, down underground. An elderly white man standing on the platform fell from the platform down to the tracks in front of an onrushing train. Everybody stood there, just looked, horrified. They couldn't act. They didn't act. Until one younger man, black fellow, nothing in common with this guy that fell on the tracks, took his two young children, passed them off to a complete stranger, jumped down to try and save the man. He couldn't. He couldn't get him up in time. So he pressed him down between the tracks, lay down on top of him, pressed himself down to allow the train to pass over them with a half inch to spare. They survived. Now, he truly was a hero of proportions. So you have big heroes and little heroes. And how were we alike? We were both heroes in that we did something. We acted when no one else would or could or did. And that, fellow Toastmasters, is what I give you as the definition of a hero. Act. Don't be one of the flock of sheep and follow what everyone else does. Think. You know what needs to be done. You know you can do it. Or maybe you don't. Just do it. I ran across a poem on the internet. Poemhunter.com was a website. It was called Heroes. And I think it really exemplifies the whole thing. Heroes are made when you make a choice. You could be a hero. Heroes do what's right. You could be a hero. You might save a life. Obviously he did. You could be a hero. You could join the fight for what's right. For what's right. For what's right. So when that time comes, remember, there is that latent hero in each and every one of us, in you. And when that time comes, and it will come for you, don't hesitate. Reach down inside, find that spark, let it burn. Let it burst forth. Be a hero. Toastmasters.